Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CCC Talks with Mark O'Loughlin and the Cloud Credential Council. Now, today we are joined by Adela Mehic-Dzanic, who is Head of Connectivity Service Provider at Mavoko AG. And Mavoko is a connectivity management platform provider headquartered in Austria, which is heavily involved in all things IoT, so IoT solutions and services. And Adela, previously you were managing director at Tele2 in Austria, and not only that, but you're also the vice president of the Female Leaders Network. Where do you get all the time? And I believe recently you were interviewed by Forbes because of that role in the Female Leaders Network. So fantastic there. But Adela, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in this digital IoT world.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, CC Talks. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. So what I do in IoT, so my journey started a couple of years back, exactly like 5 years, back in the days when it was called machine-to-machine connected devices, big data. Yes, I'm one of those people that is very much hyped, so very much excited about IoT. I was in the front line, basically meeting customers on a daily basis, mostly like big enterprises, traditional companies who back then were like, okay, so I see this big wave is coming at me. So what should I do? How can I prepare? How can I digitalize my company and my like products, if it's a hardware company and so on. So it's been a journey, or it's an ongoing journey. As you know, with IoT, it never stops, and especially if you are nowadays in the technology environment, it's always about new things coming in. I mean, nowadays we talk about 5G, we talk about AI, so we talk about many future going things. And I'm very much optimistic. So I'm very much optimistic. I've come from the days when it was talked about 2020 was a big year for us because it says like 50 billion devices will be connected. That was like Cisco or Gartner reports. And we all have been rushed towards that number. And it was about we connect everything. So basically toothbrushes or whatever, doors, machines, there was no limit. Cows, we even have elephants that we have connected back in South Africa. So I think we've done some really good. So I personally have done some really good projects, but as well I have contributed, like many of us, to this big hype, of Internet of Things, where we said, yeah, let's go. And I think that nowadays IoT is getting more and more mature, which is good. That people are realizing, okay, let's a little bit demystify this area. Let's see where is exactly that we should be looking at, what fits to us, our industry, our customers, and not just basically rush into it because it's so nice, it's fancy, it's a buzzword, and you go around, travel around the world, you meet, you go to the Mobile World Congress, or you go to the Las Vegas, different conferences, and you just get all these shiny objects, and it feels perfect, which is good. You always need these kind of companies that push through and bring new ideas that you haven't think about, like connected toilets. That was a big thing back a couple of years in Las Vegas. But as well, it's good, to stay grounded and to realize, okay, so what a traditional company that for the last 50 years or 100 years has been producing hardware, or has been producing like big heavy machinery. So how this company then realizes digitalization, and what does it mean? And in most of the cases, in the cases that I've been working on, it's very different. And this is what I love about IoT personally, and why I have been very long there. And I see so much opportunities, because there's different ways how you can approach different problems and different challenges. So it's not one size, one solution fits everyone, but it's basically, okay, what do I do? And I think that's where the companies, a little bit out of my experience, get lost, because they see, okay, this big producer, or this big company is doing this, let's try it out, without considering, okay, what is that we as a company, what are our value, what is our culture, what is that we want to achieve, which ideas we already have, go to talk to your customers, realizing, okay, this makes sense. These are the couple of ideas that we want to work, put the first prototypes, go get the, you know, the approval from the market, from the CEOs, and so on and so forth. So to make the story short, it's a very exciting area to work in. It's so much for me personally. It was a big challenge back then, and it still is, because, as you know, it's developing. And I would like to see many women as well in this in the IoT industry, and especially in tech. So and you know, IoT / of course tech industry in general. And this was one of the reasons. So back 2 years, when I started realizing that more and more, so if you go, you know, up to the corporate ladder, or in general, so when you're in the tech industry, in international environment, that I am the only woman at the table. And you know, it's good, you know. It's like, if you, when you're focused on career, and you're just like, okay, like I was back then, it's just, I want to learn, I want to develop, I want to grow, give me more, you know, exciting projects. So what, I was very much, you know, very much focused. And then basically I started looking around, and I started seeing different initiatives, and I started to, you know, do more research, and I started talking to other women who experience the same, that they are the only woman on the table, and that they are at the table, and that they are basically, you know, sometimes feel that they are not involved, and they're not included, their voices are not heard, because you always, you know, in these big groups, you will always have people who are just like super loud, and they just, you know, like to yell their solutions out. And in most of the cases, other, you know, if you're not you know, pushing on all sides, and you're being super loud, and if you are moving towards collaboration, which is very important for IoT, then your voice doesn't get heard. And that was what basically motivated me, that I just, you know, start getting involved a little bit more. And now I'm very actively involved, where I work not just for women in tech, so I have different initiatives that I do with women in tech, but as well women in business, because we see that, you know, diversity, inclusion, and is so much important through all, globally. And so those are the things that, you know, IoT is a global business. So this is what we were always saying about. And as well, this topic that we have, so diversity, inclusion, how to make everyone heard, and all the opinions heard and included. It's a global topic. So somehow I don't know, it fits together, and somehow, you know, you meet people. So because I'm very much about customers, and meeting customers, partner, working along with them. So it fits together. So when people ask me about the time, I would say that it's for me, what has been working really well is about connecting the dots. Basically, that's one of the skills that I've been nurturing throughout the years. And it's just like, okay, once you talk to one person, my brain starts thinking about, okay, how can I involve this person to different projects, or how this person should work with our partners, or maybe I can bring this person to a different initiative, and so on.
That's an interesting view, as you said. There's a few interesting areas in there. One about connecting dots. I think IoT is one of the dots in this digital space that organizations can look at. We'll drill in on that in a moment. It's good to see, you know, the gender balance, the female balance coming into IT more than we've seen in the past. I think that's a good thing. It can only be a good thing. And I think probably when we look at IT now, no longer as the technology and the nuts and bolts and the servers and all that kind of stuff. As we move into this cloud digital world, IT comes to be more about a business enabler rather than the technology itself. I think that's a great opening to get women interested at school, college, university, or later in their career into it, because it probably is it's just business at the end of the day, you know. So where technology may have not seemed the greatest career maybe for some, for others, it's not that anymore now. It's about, look at the business focus of it. For example, IoT, we'll talk about IoT. We'll talk very little about the technology because it's just there now with all IoT providers. But what are we doing it for? What are the benefits? Not that deep thinking, which I think is good. That sounds like you've a deep passion you found for IoT, which is good as well, because I think as people understand it, it's so interesting in what it can do and the opportunity that's there. But what we've seen, you've probably seen it, so you're heavily involved in IoT, of a lot of use cases there. But we've seen many companies interested in IoT, about how they make it a competitive advantage or some new product or something like this. But a lot of companies that we see start with the technology first and then fail and spend a lot of money, a couple of million, maybe tens of millions, maybe a lot more into an IoT project that doesn't go anywhere, doesn't yield results, and then it's cancelled. Have you seen examples of this? And if you have, can you tell us where they went wrong? What happened there?
So I think you're on spot, so Mark, with that, and throughout the last years, one of my jobs, or one of the discussion, the main discussion that I try to have with my customers as a consultant as well, to move aside the technology. So, as you said, it's a business decision,
yeah,
and
right.
it's firstly about realizing, okay, what do we want to achieve? So where do we see ourselves as a company in 5 or 10 years? What is the vision? So what is the vision? What is the mission of this company? How can we, if we are a hardware company, for instance, or a heavy machinery or a factory company, so how can we, what is that we want to achieve with this prototyping? Because it's the easiest way to go into a prototype. That's so easy. And it's so easy to get ideas, because we all have ideas. So if I ask you about 3 ideas of how to connect the machine, so you will have it. Everybody has ideas, but it's about realizing, technology is at the end. And I was coming to as a consultant from a telecom operator, so which at the end of the day is a technology enabler. And it's my job at the end of the day was for these customers to put the SIM card or SIM chip into their devices, and get the data, gather the data, and then they could process it. So, but we we realized back then that it's not about technology. That comes basically at the later stage, because it's a different. If you realize, okay, I will have these cameras. For instance, let's think about the cameras, and I will have these cameras, and they will be installed in this house, for instance, and they will be. So that means it's not a moving object, so it's a static object. Static object requires different connectivity requirements, so that means the technology, so enabling them, it's different than if I'm thinking about, okay, I'm a logistic company, and as a logistic company, I want to be able to know where are all my trucks and cars and whatever. I want to optimize their routes and so on, and the performance. So for them, there's a different set of requirements that they need. But this is what you realize basically at the end of the day. So when you work with the companies, that what does it mean? So okay, maybe I will need 4G, or 2G is not enough. So I need 3G, 4G. I need the European coverage. I need the US coverage. I need Asia. And how much does it cost? Basically, but the first is, it's very much important to start with the use cases, and what we always advise our customers, because what we forgot to say is that IoT is complex. It is. So I don't want to underestimate the complexity of it, because it wouldn't be right, because it is very complex. And I must say that as well, that we, all of us, so in this IoT ecosystem, sometimes make it even more complex, because for us, sometimes it's so hard to understand. And then when we go to the customer, we as well, they expect from us to advise them in the best way. And what we advised the customers back then was basically that we work together with the partners. So we never said, like, let's fast prototype it and let's roll it out and let's see what the market says. But let's bring best of the breed partners that we have in our ecosystem. And back then we worked mostly strongly with partners. And then we would say, okay, if you want to digitalize, if you're a hardware producer and then you want to, digitalize your ecosystem, then we would like to bring a couple of partners. It might be Microsoft Asia, for instance, or any other partner to the table, and then together they would be able to work it out. So it's important to realize that it's about the ecosystem. So it's and that's what major telecom operators are now talking about. It's about the ecosystem, and it's about not going into different verticals, but trying to offer some horizontal solutions that can help customers not to get overwhelmed at the beginning.
That's pretty interesting. I said IoT is about ecosystems. It doesn't exist on its own. It's where it is today. They said we've had names for it in the past, but it really came on leaps and bounds in the last number of years with cloud and more digital enabled technologies that are provided by partners. We don't call them vendors, let's call them partners now, because that's what they are. They develop IoT platforms. It's not the end solution, but it takes away a lot of the IT plumbing that you don't not need to think about anymore. So I think what you're saying is organizations need to think about the what and the why. Why are we doing this? What will it do? How will it achieve something for our customers or our business? And then knowing that we have to address that, but we have IT partners to help us with some of the technology, but we still have to join the bit in the middle. And he said that's where a little bit of complexity comes in, which I think is interesting, because very important. We need the partners out there. You need to understand the what and the why, but also understand there is complexity, because you're either trying to solve, I guess, a business problem, a customer problem, or to do something different. That's not easy in business.
Yes.
So if you were to try and do that in business outside of the conversation on IoT, that's going to be a difficult conversation anyway. So we shouldn't be afraid of it now. I think we should embrace it as part of a business discussion, using technology and digital services as part of the answer, where we no longer have to make up and build all that IT to make it run. I think that's very advantageous, but it's certainly IoT, the way we see it, is it does require use of partners and their services as well. How should a company start thinking about IoT? So, as you said, it's very popular now. People are now jumping on the IoT bandwagon. We've got to do something with sensors and customer data and all sorts of different things. How do they start? What are one or two tips for organizations to really focus on trying to start right, to do the right thing?
So if I may add just to our previous question, it's always about this, you have this usual, business as usual, and as well, it's always good to have some part of experimentation, so
Yes.
It's always good to put some effort. So it's not about, the whole company is jumping on the IoT, but it's about, this exploration. So what can we do? And then it might be like 5% of our resources, and so on. So let's try to play it out with, and see what we can make out of it. And then in the parallel, our business as usual is running. What we have seen through our experience, through working with the customers, and with what we advise them, was start small, test it out, and then scale. So it's not about, connecting. If you are a vending machine, for instance, and you have your device, your vending machines through the airports and around Europe. So it's not about connecting 10,000 of these machines, and specifically going into the whole Europe and the US and China. So it has to be the headquarters are, for instance, here in Vienna. Let's start with these 5 vending machines that you have in your office. Let's realize who can, once we realize, okay, we want to connect them, because we want to make sure that our machines are always serviced, that we exactly know. So for instance, if I'm at the airport and the machine doesn't accept my credit card, so that I know, okay, either I have to leave, and you have unsatisfied customer, and you have a big line that people that cannot use your services. So it's companies have realized. So the thing is that they're realizing more and more, and then of course the ones that used to approach us and not us approaching them. So it was already, they saw, okay, we want to do something, and we see, of course, that we can, use, is it for the service maintenance, for the predictive maintenance? That was the basic use case that we all know about it. So start small, try it out, see what works, and really give it a try. So it's not about buying a cheap €1 or whatever cheap from China, or the cheapest one, and said it doesn't work, and then you don't put a person, dedicated person. So that's the other thing. So you have to have people who will take care about this project. So and not put another extra effort on his or her table. So it's about it's top down. You have, the company needs to realize that okay, we are treating this very seriously, so we want to give it a try, and then you need to dedicate a certain resources like people and time, 3 to 6 months, where you basically play with it and try different tools. And this is where mostly all the companies, so they go to telecom operators. So in most of the cases they will go to telecom operators, or before that they already have, if it's a really large corporation, they used to work with consultants. So like the four major consulting companies, they would go to them, they would do a big business case for them, and they would calculate all of that and come with ideas. And the second, or in parallel, is the telecom operator. So telecom operators, they play a very important role. And back in the days, I was confronted daily with the customers asking me, okay, so which technology, for instance, should I be using? So or what happens if 2G is not possible anymore, or 3G is disconnected, and the sunset is happening. So what do we do? And then the usual case is about have the backup, have a don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I think realizing that we are all learning. We are all learning, and we are all growing. So I that's why what we said before, partnering and ecosystem. It's not like telecom operators are eager to give their part of the revenue to different sides of the ecosystem. It's about realizing, okay, it's a complex problem, and every company is different. So we need to have different set of players who can support. But I would say the most important is to start with this particular use cases or this particular challenge that you have. Start small, so because you have, at the end of the year or after 6 months, you will have to show the costs. So it's important to keep track of your costs, not just spend it as there's no tomorrow, and then you don't have costs for other projects. Give it a try and be very transparent and open about it. So I think it's on the company's level. I think the transparency and openness is so important, because it gives the the tone and the culture. It plays an important role where you involve all the departments in this whole story, and make it people that they are involved, and then they feel that they are contributing to the solution, and not being basically isolated. Unfortunately, it's like that most of the projects, they end up in the POC phase. So very fast they go in the POC phase, but they stay there. So this is another challenge that we have seen, and if you read different reports, they show the same. Unfortunately, it's so. And some people will say, okay, because of the lack of the resources, or because we don't have enough people who can look into this, or we don't understand it, or the priorities have changed, and the challenges are too big, or the security is so important, and so on. So I think what matters for the companies is to really from the start try to find people that you really trust and want to work with, and that they can support you along the way.
And that's so important, as you said, from the stakeholder buy-in to then people trying to innovate with IoT, getting the right team in place. There's so many case studies now that show organizations that put in multi-million dollars, tens of millions of dollars, or whatever currency into an IoT, put it into a POC, a proof of concept, gave it 6 months, didn't see any return back to shareholders, and just closed it down. That's a recipe for disaster. And I think, Adela, you mentioned there that start small. You probably won't have the answers. That's fine. Try something, fail again. It's not failure if you're learning from what you've just failed. Basically, that's called learning and experimentation. So I think that might be a good framework for some organizations initially anyway, looking at starting small, keep the cost under control. You don't need mega millions to start an IoT project or anything. Don't get stuck in POCs. If it's not working, stop or repurpose or reuse what you're doing. Sounds like what you're saying. Because what I find a lot of organizations, they don't know what they're trying to solve. They don't know the problem. And then other organizations will say, we don't have a problem. They say, okay, well, your problem might not be visible, but what is your competitor thinking of doing with IoT? Because that will become an unknown problem of yours later on. So try and experiment. It's not a 6-month project. You're not going to get return on investment within a short period of time. What you're doing is experimenting, learning, figuring things out, seeing what works in the market. And I think there's so many iterations of IoT that have come out of things that people didn't even try to solve. That just they happened to stumble upon something and it worked, you know. And I think that that's good. There's also a big conversation these days about IoT and smart cities. So this is where we get into the citizen. So away kind of from the business aspect, but into society and how IoT might revolutionize our lives as citizens, you know. Um, do you see any advance in that space at the moment? What benefits we might see as citizens from IoT, or is that still early days?
So those are some of the projects that long-term projects we used to call them. So we always had this, you know, the classification. So you have the private companies and medium to large enterprises that we love to work with, and it was like pretty fast, where we would from the initial phase to the prototyping to realizing what we want to achieve. And then on the other side, we had long-term projects that involved mostly working with the government and in public institutions. And those were the projects that we would, you know, follow along, let's put it that way, for a simple reason that in any job, job that you work with the government and public institution, there's so much of this compliancy and different policies, and that you have to work around, and that's why. And they are long-term projects, and one of them, of course, that we all, so each telecom operator was working the last couple of years, were the rollout of smart meters. So that we all know about it, and it was through every country, or every telecom operator had a different, you know, use cases, and how much of them have we rolled out, and which have been successful, and why they haven't been successful, and until the regulation came and they said, okay, until that specific date it has to be rolled out, and it was basically put a little bit more pressure on it. And of course, what all IoT projects have in common, including the smart cities, it's about, you know, being more efficient. It's about optimization. It's about increasing the productivity. It's about being green. It's about offering new services. It's about making our lives easier. So if you think about, you know, the transport and infrastructure. So we all talk about, you know, the scarce resources, the emissions, so how we can make our planet greener. And of course, cities are getting more and more populated. There are more people, so more users of the services, and we are getting more busier and busier. So, you know, nowadays, e-government, for instance, as a project is I want to have all my documents basically where I can download them. So I never thought about, you know, going to some places and just collecting the documents and having it printed out and put it doesn't make sense, you know, in the days that we live. So we, of course, our government and institutions will follow. And the idea for me as a normal citizen as well is to make sure that, you know, that it makes my life easier, and that I know basically this is, you know, that I see there's innovation happening. So it's not innovation just happening in traditional companies or big companies or abroad, but it's happening as well in my city. And, you know, Vienna is known as a smart city, clean city, but it depends who you ask as well. You know, smart city is a different smart city for you, and smart city for me and for our viewers is a completely different. It can be very, very different. For me, who's living in Vienna for such a long time, it's like, oh, I of course that, you know, I know when the tram is coming, and I know that there is delays, and I want to have, you know, internet, the Wi-Fi in my you know, when I'm traveling abroad. This is of course, I'm not thinking about it anymore, or that the traffic lights and the management and that they are getting greener and greener every year, it's of course, for me, it's like, yes, that's it, that's per default. And for some abroad and for some other cities, it might be very, very different. But it's a way forward. It's a way forward. I think it's important to know, to have us feel that we see the value. So basically, okay, our city is moving forward, and I see the value every day.
I think I think the smart city concept is a huge area for businesses to help government. It's where business and government can actually play a good part with the vendor ecosystem. I mean, just look at any street, main street in any city and say, what are the challenges that the citizens face here and that the governments face? Where are the costs? Now, how could we look at addressing some of this with some intelligent digital solutions and some IoT type solutions? And I don't think it would take too long to come up with some of the answers, but we know change can be difficult and can take time. But again, it's having those conversations. The technology is so available these days and improves radically month on month these days that I'm sure these things can look at. But you did something I've seen recently as well. You've done a very, I thought, interesting presentation that's titled "Start Yesterday with IoT." I think that's a great presentation title, and it says a lot. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by starting yesterday with IoT.
It goes very well hand in hand with what you said about the change. Before we address the technology, the solutions. So
Right.
it was very much about change and
Right.
real understanding, and that change is difficult.
Yes.
If we it's good to put ourselves in our customers' shoes. If
Yeah.
I got used to it over the last couple of years, that I have the same path when I go to work, I usually take that road. It's not like every day I'm trying new paths, or every week or every month.
Yeah.
It's realizing, I think, what back in the days would start yesterday with IoT. It was to start to have our customers to start thinking about it earlier, before it knocks on your door, and
Yes.
realizing that the change basically, look at now, we all talk about Amazon is taking a piece of pie here, piece of pie there. Yeah, but we all knew that 5 years ago, that
Yeah.
it's maybe not in that shape and form, but we knew that they are not going to stop. And we said at the beginning, business, profit. So businesses do exist to make profit and to
Yes.
bring value and to offer new services and so on. So it's expected from these giants as well that they always come up with the new solutions, and they are not asking themselves basically, should I offer something new? Am I competitive enough? They're just going for it, or any
Yes.
other companies, and that is very
That's
important for the companies to realize that there's something happening out there. There are companies in my industry that are doing some really new intelligent things. How do they do that? They do that through the data,
yeah.
gathering the data, so they are not locked in their room and they're just realizing, okay, I know all the solution and this is what the customer needs, or someone told me that the customer needs, or reports. So they are not out there trying new things out. And all these big companies, they have products that they launched and then they failed, and then they or they bought the companies and then they closed
Yeah.
it, because that's the way it is. It's not on the market
Yes.
anymore. But with that presentation back then, it was about start thinking about what is coming, and not just lock yourself in the room and just say try one POC, and it didn't work out.
Yes.
But try, as you said yourself, try to learn from it. I've seen some companies who have started kind of failure nights or failures festivals, and
Yeah.
some of them are really large companies here in Austria. So it's not that they are going out and celebrating every failure that they do, but they are encouraging this transparency and being open and acknowledging, okay, if we're doing something, if we're trying something out, we are making progress. And
Yes.
let's acknowledge this, and let's share this with the bigger audience, with the other departments, so that they know what we are working out, because it's a collective, collective
Yeah.
challenge. It's not like one department is super successful, we don't care, we just enjoy our success, and the others are just like, yeah, look at Nokia. So we all talk about Nokia is an example. And today in the morning I had a workshop, and there was a lot of talk about Nokia, especially the phone part, where they went from the being owning over 60% of the market share to, in less than 10 years, they went to less than 1%, and now, nobody knows about them. So it can go really, really fast. Yeah.
And that's the change in today. As you said, the big players are just doing it. Now they're well funded, they can afford to just do it, but they're doing it without this fear of failure. I think other organizations need to just try and do things and try things. As you said, even these fail festivals are interesting. But I always look at, when I think about IoT and this kind of, it's not failure culture, because as long as we learn from what we've done that hasn't worked out, it's called learning. And it's on the job learning rather than specific stuff. Small babies learn by failing. Before they can walk, they need to fall. And then they stop falling as much, and they're learning from that. They're learning balance. And before you know it, baby can walk, and it's fantastic. And all other things that we'll all equate to it with babies. And then I think this IoT as well, just as you said, doesn't exist in isolation in an organization. But also, IoT doesn't exist in isolation to IoT. You mentioned data. Data is so important regarding IoT, because the IoT solution you can do can achieve something, so it can solve a problem, but you can amass a huge amount of data, whether it's on individuals or the situation that's being addressed. And it's the analysis of that data can then lead to other business lines or opportunity or innovation, whether it's an IoT solution or a digital solution or a smart city service. But you don't get there if you don't have the data, first of all, and you don't get there if you don't analyze the data, understand the data, and do something with the data. So I think IoT doesn't exist in isolation itself either. With all these other digital services, it needs them as well. Would you share that view?
Yes, for sure. So I think back in the day, so what is IoT? So you have on one side you have the hardware, you have some sort of device, you have the the SIM card, and you have the cloud solution. So back in the days when I was a telecom operator, so the data was a crucial. So it's so neglectable. So you just, okay, it's just a SIM card, and it's transfer the data, and of course it works like just like in my phone. But without that, you don't have this connection. So there's not this machine to machine. So there's not two. And one of the things that I read today about that I wasn't aware, but I read about Nokia case with the phones back then. They were in the B2B business, and they relied on the the acceptance of the market, or which products are, which phones are more attractive with the consumers. Based on the data that they got from their distributors, right? So they would distribute millions of phones, and then they would get the statistics, but they didn't have this relationship. So they were B2B, but there was this B2B to C. So basically, the link was missing, and they unfortunately didn't realize that that's where the innovation happens, and that's where you gather the data, and when you get the insights about what the customer wants. And so I think we can learn pretty much a lot from them. And in the last 5 years at least, there was so much about the data. Data is the new oil, and so on. Data is the new currency, and if you have the data, but what we realized as well, so on one side you have the data, and as you said yourself, is as well, the companies very often don't know what to do with the data. So you have tons and tons of those data, and it's just how do I go around it? How do I extract the the value out of these
Yes.
data? And what we have in Europe as well is this data, privacy. And when you talk with with the companies, they all get really data. It's specific to people. And
Yeah.
so on. So it can be, it's a very tricky. It's very tricky. But what's important to realize that not all the data, so especially with the machines, and especially with trackers or cars and whatsoever, it's not all related to you and me, to the users. So it's not taking or gathering any data from like date of the birth or the name and so on. It's just the position, and it can be how cold is outside or whatever, any code that it's programmed to send.
Yeah.
So it's good to demystify. I think we have some job to do on demystifying as well with the the smart cities. When you tell the people about the smart cities, the first thing, and with me as well, comes the CCTV cameras. We all been watched, and it's like a big brother, and we don't want that. So there's a lot of nuances in between, having clean and on time, and regular transport, and knowing where and what and how, to the we are being watched, and the government knows what we are doing.
Indeed, there are four letters that scare a lot of people operating within or the jurisdiction of the EU, GDPR. But I think it's one of the
Yes.
most misunderstood legislations that was put out there, because, as you said, once you understand it and you're collecting data, you're collecting a lot of data. If it was a car, telemetry about the car, not the individual. So you may want to see, are the brakes performing as they should under certain temperature conditions, as opposed to what that means for me in the car doing something, and you're quite entitled to that. And the benefit back to the customer is probably a better braking system 2 years down the line, because you know when it fails and when it doesn't fail, something like that. And continuing on, a lot of people do have concerns about data security and privacy. Now, do you think, in your experience, that those concerns are being addressed by the major IoT platform providers and that ecosystem? Should people be worried?
You have people who talk about how worried they are, and then they go on Facebook and post everything about their private life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We had that example today
as well. Yeah, where you have a mobile phone, like you're worried about the smart city sensor capturing something about you that goes to government and they know everything about you. But as a citizen, you're quite okay carrying a phone in your pocket that, when you set it up, says, you consent to giving all your data to whatever,
everything.
whoever it is at the end of the day. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a misconception there as well. There's a learning piece, but I think if you're an organization providing an IoT solution, it's probably good practice to try and educate your customers about what you do with the data and what you don't do, and separate it out and say, data about you personally, we don't look at. Data about how you might use a product is autonomized, and we might use that to further improve things. And we've been doing that for years. We've been asking customers that for years. We're just doing it in a slightly different way. What are one or two of
And I
the, I
think
guess,
that's
key lessons? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that you said yourself, like educating people, and unfortunately, there has been some cases where the data was mishandled in different cases, or where you had some smart home devices where you they could hack so your device, and they basically could track it, what you're doing, and gather some information about you. And so it shouldn't be like totally put aside.
Sure.
So I'm sure that the companies, so for instance, who are producing these devices, have to make sure that they have it in place, and that they have thought about it before, because what I've seen through my work is that the security is always very much left at the end. So because nobody really nobody likes the. I must say nobody likes this topic. It's just it's overwhelming, and or we don't know we don't have the expert, or we don't know this, or it's too much. So when it comes to, for instance, to hardware, and I think it's these companies that are on the far front, so they usually make sure that they align with all the processes, and so all the guidelines, and so that their products are top notch. But nothing can help you if you have a device, a very, very cheap device. You buy a very, very cheap device, or you have your Wi-Fi router and you use your standard password, and then everybody can hack you, and everybody can get into your home and do whatever it wants. So there is, as you said, education is very much the key, and you can do so much in the background, but in the forefront, if you, as I said, if you don't change the password 1234, so then everybody can basically hack into your system and gather whatever they want, and you can be protected on the other side as much as you like, but on the forefront.
And you're quite right to come back and talk about that, because that's so important with IoT. If you lose customer trust, you'll probably lose. You will lose. You're likely to lose business, and that could be significant. If you have a data breach, that's significant reputational damage, fines, all these other things, and people run a mile from the product. There are so many case studies that people could find that they're cheaper security chips put into IoT devices because they're cheaper, where if they'd only spent a couple of cents more per chip, they would have had extra security. I know in the long run it could add, if you have 1 million devices, that's 3 million extra in spend. I'd rather pay that than get the fine, reputational damage, be in the news. And I think businesses should think a little bit more about that as well, that we spend so much money getting here. Security is so important that we need to invest in our internal security, make sure our partner security is up to a standard, and make sure that the security hardware that we put in our devices is significant enough, not just the cheapest thing. Because there are examples of even those home heating devices that have been hacked into, and by hacking in, it's people then got access to the internal network, and through the internal network, they got access to whether it's business information, money, whatever. It's significant, but at the end of the day, it's a bad press story for that company that created that device at the end of the day. Are there any key lessons that you've, I guess, hard learned, or some of the wisdom you've hard gained over the last couple of years that you could share? 1 or 2 key lessons?
So one of them is definitely about culture. As we know, culture it's strategy for breakfast. So we all like to say that. And I learned that through. It was hard for me at the beginning working with the customers, where you come with so many ideas and insights and how we could do it, and in a consulting role, and taking them along the way. And they would just shut down. So it wasn't a fit. So I think we were the digital natives back then. Everything is digital. Everything about digital is so exciting, and there's so much opportunities. We only saw the opportunities, and we come back to the changes. You said yourself, it's not about not about how fast I can run. It's also about how the customer, so how fast they can run, and what is their culture, and how do they approach it, how do they see it, and not jump into the solution. So this was, for instance, my personal lesson, where I would get disappointed after like 3 months and realizing, okay, this is not going, we are not progressing. And I give them all the facts and all the figures and all the information that I could figure it out, and we are not moving forward. So I think there's a lot here. So especially, as you said, gaining the trust from the customer, so that they see that you can help them, support them along the way, bring the partners, work hand in hand. So there's a lot of this, customer building relationship, which is so important and shouldn't be, underestimated. So this is where it should be very much, invested if you're coming as a consultant, for instance. If you're coming as a consultant to a company, so no matter how smart you are and no matter how many great ideas you have, if they don't trust you, if they don't want to buy from you, so you can forget it. So focus on building the trust with your customers. And of course, for the companies, it's so important. What we realized, what worked best was when we would identify some of the, we used to call them evangelists, or some of the drivers of this change. So because you can only influence one person at the time. So it's if you go to the CEO, he's always very much busy, and he will agree when he sees the figures, and you can convince him in different ways, but you need people on the ground as well who will drive this change day in and out, and who will be who will be calling you over the weekend saying, I tried this out and it's not working, and can you help me out, or can we figure out something new, and so on. So you need this, it needs to play both sides. So it's not just convincing the CEO who will say, yeah, go for it, well done, but you need to find these people who are the change drivers, who are working day in and out. And if you convince them, and if you give them, if you're supportive, and if you are there along the way, then you can really make the difference. And one of the other things is always don't come with the solutions. If we are all claiming that that we are about change, and that we are want to experimenting, and that we are about learning, and it's okay to fail, I think it's important to as well go around that, and not pretend that we all have the solutions, and that we all have figured it out everything, and it just press the button and it all works.
If only. I think that's great advice to end on. A few things you said. Look at the cultural aspect. It is about change. I love the idea about building trust at all layers. You think about the CEO, have their buy-in, but have people on the ground as the recommenders, the influencers, because so many IoT failures that I've seen from case studies are the CEO had bought in and gave a lot of money down to the department to do something with, but they'd nobody there that could then drive IoT, and then a CEO came looking for what's a return, and it wasn't a trusting relation, it was just more business transaction. Here's some money, go do IoT. It wasn't, here's some resources, let's see what we get and report back on success, or make a few failures and tell me what you're learning. That'd be success for me as a CEO, that I could report back to the board. We've had a few, people don't like saying we've had a few failures. Come up with a new, we've had a few insights or a few learnings along the way. Don't call it failure, call it learning if you've learned something from it. And then have that cohort of people that are driving an agenda, that IoT is part of the solution, or part of a solution to get a customer answer, or get a business answer, or try something different like that. But I think it has to be linked back to value to the business, potential, opportunity, all this kind of stuff, the opportunity cost of not doing something in IoT because our competitors, we think, are looking at this. They are. You know that. You don't know what they're doing, but they're certainly using all these technologies because they know that their competitors are doing something different as well. I think that's I think that's a great insight into IoT. If we were having this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, I would think the conversation would be more on the technology and what platforms we use and all the plumbing. But it's great these days we don't have to, because part of the solutions, big cloud providers, telco companies like yourself, are all part of that ecosystem that you mentioned. So as a business, we can go to organizations like yourself and cloud providers and say, you are expert in these areas, we're expert in our market, we don't quite know what we want to address, but we want us all to work together to figure something out. And I think that's where the value is, as you said, in that ecosystem, if we end on that. Would that be true? Is that where the value is?
Yes, and focus on it. Be obsessed with your customers,
Love it.
Be obsessed with your customers. And the only way you can do that is if you're close to them and you have the data, so you know what they're doing about. So be obsessed with your customers and have their, be loyal to your customers and build the trust and work along the way, because no one knows, Mark. It might be that in 2 years there's a completely new player on the market, and then comes with whatever disruptive innovation, and then it's the whole half of the other ecosystems. But not doing anything, it's more scary than trying something out.
That's right. It's easier, but in the long, medium, and long term, it's going to be more catastrophic. I think that's love the customer, focus on the customer, be loyal to the customer. You've got to be customer-centric, focused, I believe, to achieve success with IoT. Adela, thank you so much for joining us today on CCC Talks. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. It was a great pleasure.